Hello and welcome to Real Crime Profile. I'm Jim Clementi, retired FBI profiler and former New York City prosecutor, and with me today is...
Laura Richards, former New Scotland Yard and FBI trained, and I also set up as the founder and director of Paladin, the National Stalking Advocacy Service.
And...
Lisa Zambetti, casting director in LA, and I cast the show Criminal Minds, where Jim is my colleague, and I cast killers, victims, everything in between, and I have a real interest in real crime and the real minds that solve those crimes.
Today we're going to be talking about making a murder again. And we're going to drill down into two of the issues that have really been bothering us about this case. One, Officer Colborn's calling in the plates of Teresa Holbeck's car, and Pam Sturm's call to get that car identified by the VIN number. These are really troubling issues for us. We'll get down to it right now.
Just so everybody knows what we're talking about, we're going to be discussing these calls. We're going to be playing the real audio from those calls that were presented in the trial.
That's right.
So one of the things that was interesting and significant for me was just the Colborn call, when he calls in the license plate number and is told by the dispatcher that, yes, it's Teresa Holbeck's car. And then I wanted to sort of re-listen to that whole piece. And then I started to hear other things, another voice in the background. And the reason why I wanted to revisit that was because I felt, probably like lots of other people, that he was calling out the plate license from having it in front of him.
Right, like he actually saw it in front of him, and that's why he was calling it in.
Absolutely, and saying, it's a 99 Toyota, because you'd have to be a real car geek to know those things, and it just sounded very bizarre. But the other thing that it correlated with for me that just was a question mark was about Pam Sturm's testimony when she testifies and says it's the hand of God as to how she found the car within 30 minutes. And I just wanted to revisit that. So certainly when you listen to the recording, you can actually hear it. And I think, Jim, you said with your noise-cancelling headphones, you could
hear
very
it very
clearly.
Yes. You can, basically what happens is, as the defense attorney is asking Colborn while he's on the stand to listen to this call, it's clear that he calls in on a phone to dispatch, not on his car radio. Okay, that's one interesting fact.
Can you explain why that would be significant?
Well, normally you would think that a police officer who had access to his car would just call dispatch by keying the mic. I mean, that's a direct connection to dispatch. But he calls on the telephone. So it means that he probably was outside of his car, away from his car, and did not have access to his car to make that call. And then the second thing is he's reading plates. Well, if I'm not mistaken, when the car was actually located on the lot, on the Avery's lot, there were no plates. But the defense shows him the license plates at trial. So they were actually recovered somehow. We don't know where they were recovered. So that's an interesting piece of information, and we'll call out to our listeners if they know where they were found. That would be great to find that out. But it's an interesting piece of information. But what police officers do when they call it the dispatch like that, overwhelmingly, it's because they're looking at the car, reading those license tags, and then trying to find out who the owner of the car is.
But it sounded like it was also on speakerphone, didn't it? Because if you can hear a voice in the background, and you could quite clearly, and somebody slowed it down on YouTube, and you can hear it very clearly when it's in slow motion. You can hear those words at I think it's 0:56, and you can hear somebody in the background saying, "The car's here."
Right.
And
so we're going to try. You want to try to play that and
Yes.
see if we can hear it?
Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, this is Lynn. Hi, Andy.
You run Sam William Henry 582.
Okay, it shows that she's a missing person, and it lists to Teresa Holbeck.
Okay.
Okay, that's what you're looking for, Andy?
99 Toyota.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay, so a couple of important things is, one, he's calling in the actual license plate, and two, like he's not calling in a VIN number or something, which would be very difficult unless you had the car in front of you or the registration in front of you. But he's calling in the license plate, and then when she says it comes back to a missing person, Teresa Holbeck, he then says a 99 Toyota, right? And she says correct. So he knows the make and model of the car. And that's another indication that the car is sitting in front of him. Unless he actually, and he doesn't say this in his testimony, so I don't think this is true, but unless he actually is reading a bolo, basically be on the lookout for a report that says the license plate and then the make and model of the car, the make and year of the car, then it makes sense. But guess what? If that was the case, if he's reading a bolo, the bolo would say, this is Teresa Holbach's car. There would be no reason for him to call it in. Mm-hmm. So I think the only legitimate law enforcement reason for that car would either have been because he had the car in front of him or he was telling somebody, this is the car you're going to look for. But either way, if he was telling somebody this is the car you're going to look for, then what would he do? He would just show him the piece of paper. He wouldn't have to call it in. So it really narrows it down. I think he must have been looking at the car. So then when you hear in the middle of this transaction, somebody in the background saying, the car's here.
Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, this is Lynn.
Lynn,
Hi, Andy.
can you run Sam William Henry 582?
Okay, it shows that she's a missing person, and it lists to Teresa Hallback.
Okay.
Okay, that's what you're looking for, Andy?
99 Toyota.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay.
But it is problematic. I mean, what did it make you think?
Well, I mean, it was troubling me. It troubled me just from having watched the documentary that I actually revisited that episode. And I listened to it again last night. And Colborn's reaction when he's told, oh, you were the one who said it was a 99 Toyota. And he says, no, I don't think it was me. It was her. And then it was played again. And it's very clearly him saying it. And it just sounds so natural, as if this car is right in front of him. And then the person in the background, certainly the voice. And again, you'd probably need a voice recognition expert or someone to clean it up. But certainly sounds quite similar to Pam Stern's voice, the woman who actually then found the car. And of course, this is days before the car's actually found. And let's say Colborn did stumble upon this car. Let's say they were searching illegally. He knew very well that he couldn't be the one that would find it. And I think I went back and listened to Pam Stern's when she testified in court, and her account just troubled me right from the start. I mean, certainly the fact that she decides to go up to the search, well, that's not a problem because lots of people volunteered. But the fact that she's saying straight off the bat that she wants to go, has anyone searched the salvage yard? And they say no. And she says that that's where she's going to go to. And she's the only one that's issued with a camera. She's given a map as well. But out of all of the searching volunteers, she's the one that gets the camera. And off she goes with the permission from Earl, the brother, that she's allowed to be on that property and search. It's just such a huge area, and to stumble upon this car within 30 minutes and call it in and be so persistent of wanting to know whether it's Teresa's car or not, and then saying it's the hand of God, it just didn't feel right. And certainly listening to how she pronounces the word car, where somebody who's very helpful has slowed it down on YouTube, and of course you can always take these things with a pinch of salt. You'd want to make sure that you had some, a proper expert analysing it. But certainly it sounds very similar to her voice.
Right. So what we're saying is what we're listening to right now is from YouTube.
Right.
That's right from the documentary, which is exactly from the trial. But what you've heard is that track slowed down by somebody.
Correct.
So you have to understand that not everybody on YouTube that posts videos and posts audio is actually being legitimate. But actually, I went back and listened to the actual audio that they played during the trial, and you can clearly hear it, that it says, the car's here. And that's pretty significant. The only way I think that it could be that Colborn didn't find that car is if he read out the license plate because he had it on a thing, and he's looking at another car, and somebody else is there saying this is her car, and he's got the plate from his bolo sheet, be on the lookout for sheet, that he then says, well, he then turns around to the caller, and to the person in the background and says, no, the real plate is what I just read off and had confirmed I just wanted to make sure he didn't at request for the plate that was on the car he was looking at, because somebody could be saying, for example, somebody calls the police and says, hey, I think I found her car, and there's a RAV4 sitting there, same year. And he says, no, that's not the plate. This is the plate. We have it on our thing. Let me just confirm. When he does confirm that that's her plate, then he goes to the other person, no, this on my Bolo is the correct plate. That one that we're sitting in front of is not the correct plate. So, but the only problem with that is somebody could certainly steal plates and switch them on a car. So he should be looking at the VIN number and to confirm all that, which is what, for example,
Pam is asked to give
when
she calls it in.
Right. She's asked to, because the plates are not on the car, she's asked to give the VIN number, and the VIN number is on the front dash. It's very easy to see through the window. I don't think that there's a legitimate reason for Officer Colborn to have called this in. Certainly, if there had been, I would expect him to have testified to it while he was on the stand, which we haven't seen. Now,
and it is significant because it's days before the car is found, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's days before the car is found by
Pam.
In inverted commas, by Pam.
Indeed, inverted commas for sure on this one.
Yes.
So what do you make of this sentence? The car is here. Who is she? That person? Who are they talking to? It can't be Colborn.
Oh, it could be. She's in the background.
But why is she?
You're right. She could be on the phone talking to somebody else because she's doing she's out on a search party and they found the car and they're not supposed to be there. So
there could be a number of them. I mean, they're certainly not meant to be where they are, I would suggest, if it's Colborn, but it doesn't mean to say there's just Pam there. There could be a number of people. Right. And of course, he may not have factored in background noise. And as people, he can't control what everybody's saying around him. So it's been picked up.
Right. One thing about Pam's voice, by the way, I just want to say that this area of the country does have a very strong regional dialect.
Very, yeah.
And I think that, as you said, we really need to have somebody like a Jim Fitzgerald or
someone totally independent take clean copies and listen to them.
Right, and because Jim Fitzgerald is one of my colleagues who's a forensic linguistic profiler, and he is very attuned to regionalisms and idiolects. Idiolects are personal dialects, and so it would be better if somebody like that actually studied the actual recording of Pam's voice and of this caller. Of course, the sample size.
I was going to say
small.
that is
it's
such
so
a small.
small.
I wonder what how much he needs to be able to even make a...
But what I'm trying to say is that to those of us who are not from Manitowoc County, we probably think that everybody in Manitowoc County sounds exactly the same, whereas there are a lot of individual idiolects in the Manitowoc County dialect. So we would probably think it sounds like Pam, even if it was some other female, because they have such a strong accent.
Yeah, I mean, it could, just be a female colleague. It could be anybody. And of course, the other thing to say is this is such a small town that we don't know who knows whom. So, it could well be that Pam and Colborn are connected in some way. I certainly don't know, but I get the impression that everybody knows everybody.
That's what struck me when Colborn calls it in and the dispatch recognizes his voice. I mean, almost nothing. I mean, she knows who he is right away, unless there's some kind
probably
of...
a caller ID.
Caller ID,
yeah,
okay.
When you call dispatch, I mean, it's similar to calling 911. And that's why he should have just keyed the mic. It would have been...
But she doesn't pick up and she picks up and says Manitowoc, whatever.
Yeah.
She doesn't pick up and go, hey, Andy,
Okay.
So I don't know. It's just, it kind of struck me.
You're right. I don't know what their technology level was back then either.
I mean, certainly in between that, you've got the police changing their minds about their search plan and strategy, which, again, depending on where the footage is from, there's a piece that connects the fact that there's a phone call between Calumet and Manitowoc basically saying, we've got to change a plan. We've decided that we want to search the Avery junkyard, I think it is said.
And you're saying this is after this phone call gets logged.
Well, it's how it's sequenced in this footage. So we don't know. My honest answer is I don't know how that's sequenced. It's certainly put in this particular bit of footage as the next thing that happens. And then Pam going up to the volunteers and talking about wanting to search the junkyard as well. And then it's all neatly packaged. And so I guess what Jim and I would probably say from that, it's too neatly packaged that we just want to see that sequencing of how these things unfold.
Right. And in that call, by the way, let me pull it up on my screen here. It is reported that it's on the morning of Saturday, November 5th, 2005. Hours before the RAV4 is found on the Avery property, that Calumet County it says that on the morning of Saturday, November 5th, 2005, hours before Teresa's RAV4 is found on the Avery lot, Calumet County Detective Mark Weigart calls Manitowoc County Detective Dave Remiker and basically says, hey, Weigart says to Remiker, hey, the chief wants us to go back and search the Avery property again. The searchers are there. We're going to ask if they will allow the searchers to go on the property. I mean,
of the junkyard. They say specifically,
yes.
I think, the junkyard.
Yes, and it's and he says change of plans to start this call off. And so I'll play it for you so you can hear that. Let me just. It's probably.
Back over. Hey, I have a change of plans here, okay?
Okay, let me just tell you, it starts off with, hey, kind of a change of plans here. Now, if we were to be doing a statement analysis of this, when somebody says kind of, what they're trying to do is they're stepping back from the information that's about to come. In other words, they're not buying into it completely. They're saying it's not really a change of plans. It's kind of a change of plans. And so what does that mean? It means that probably it's an indicator of deception. They're not telling the truth here. So it's weird that that's how this guy starts off. But hello, it's Jim Clementi and Francie Hakes with a special message about a new show that I'm hosting on Wondery called Locked Up Abroad. In each episode, people tell their harrowing stories of being convicted of crimes and jailed in foreign lands, or kidnapped and held hostage in war-torn countries.
These are definitely worst-case scenarios. They're truly frightening situations.
Yes, no best cases here.
But it is fascinating to hear how they manage to survive these ordeals.
In the first episode, Midnight Express, Billy Hayes tells us about being imprisoned in Turkey for smuggling hashish. Oliver Stone even made a movie about it. But that was the movie. This is the real story. I even had the chance to interview Billy Hayes recently, and he told me the whole story behind the story of how he escaped a Turkish prison. He even told me that he went back to Turkey years later. You have to hear his story to believe it.
And now, in his own words, here is Billy Hayes.
The boss, yeah. He wants us to do, okay? He wants us to go back over and re-interview Avery again. And the search party is out there, and he wants to ask them if they would allow us to have the search party come on the property and go through the junkyard. Okay,
So he wants us to ask the Averys to have the search party go and search the junkyard. I mean, that's a very specific request. This is, again, after this call came in from Colborn. I mean, days after, right? But it's just a very strange turn of events. It looks suspicious.
And to ask permission, the search party to go on the property rather than
the
police are going to go in with a search warrant to search the property certainly is a big question mark for me.
Yeah, why is the chief of police saying that he, instead of doing a search, a legitimate law enforcement search, we want to get permission for non-law enforcement officers to do a search? To me, it's a lot like when somebody says, come with me, and then they discover, in inverted commas, a body.
The body.
Because typically when people do that, when people have killed somebody and they know the body will be connected to them or the place they live or work or play, what they'll do is they'll have somebody come with them so that they discover the body together.
They need a third party.
Exactly. And that really seems to be what's going on here. I mean,
It's the same scenario. I mean, I would say exactly it's the same scenario.
yeah, it's very troubling to me.
And next minute, Pam, of course, appears.
Yes, and in 20 minutes, out of 3,000 or 4,000 cars, she immediately, I mean, almost immediately, the second thing she does is go to the line of cars where the vehicle is actually located. And it's kind of weird because there's a massive, actual flat level lot. And then there's this ridge, and there's one little line of cars, a dozen or so cars up on top of that ridge. But she chooses to go away from the big lot that she's actually been starting to search in.
And the natural direction of travel,
Right.
should you search it in
And she
a
goes
sort of
around a
rigorous
pond,
way.
up this hill, and finds the car.
But lo and behold, she has a camera with her ready.
Yeah, well, tell us about that.
Well, it's just, another anomaly in that the other searchers, bearing in mind there's a number of them who've been there for some time. Some of them are issued with maps, but certainly none of the other searchers are issued with a camera. And Pam is the only one who's given a camera and is told not to touch anything if she finds anything. But she stumbles upon the car within, I think they had been on the lot actually for 30 minutes. I think they went on at something like 10 to, and then 10 to 10, then they find it and they call it in about 1/2 or 20 past, something like that.
I'd like to play Pam's call if we can find it.
I said, Nicole, you have to come and see this car. It must be her car.
Did you attempt to verify the identification of this vehicle?
Yes.
And how was that done?
My daughter, Nicole, brought her cell phone along. And I should back up. Ryan gave us a direct line to Sheriff Poggle in case we found something. So I called Sheriff Poggle and I said, I think I found the vehicle.
How long from when you entered that property did it take you to find Teresa's vehicle?
I believe we entered at 10 to 10. And by 10:20 to 10:25, we had found the vehicle.
Ms. Sturm, do you know how many vehicles are on this property?
I didn't at the time. I had no idea.
Looking at it now, do you think you got lucky?
Yeah, well, not lucky. God showed us the way. I do believe that.
Right. Do you think, looking at this exhibit now, that you and your daughter, Nikki, could have searched that entire salvage yard?
We would have tried. We would have came back the next day if we had to.
I mean, I know there was the first thing that I'd mentioned from the first time that I saw and heard it, which was her persistence with the dispatcher saying that she wanted verification whether this was Teresa's car. And I just felt that she was sort of overcommitted to that. You don't always get to hear the beginning, middle and end when, you are calling something in or you're a witness to something. But she was really persistent. And that's what struck me. Why was she being so persistent? And the other part was that, yes, she received a map and she also received a camera. But you clearly hear her say that she had a direct line to the sheriff, Sheriff Poggle, in case she found anything. And I just wonder, did every volunteer have a direct line to the sheriff, every person doing a search? Or was it just, again, Pam, who seems to be very well equipped with all of these things and then finds, the car within a 20-minute search?
I have the call that Pam Sturm made to the police department to try to identify the vehicle she found.
Hi, this is Pam Sturm. I'm on the search for Teresa Hallbeck, and we have found a RAV4.
Is there any license plates on it?
No plates on it, but it's a little covered up. It's weird. It's covered up.
Okay, can you get to the front of the car?
Yeah, I will. I can't find a VIN number. Is that okay if I go in the car?
No, do not go in the car. Do not touch the car.
Yeah.
Stay on the outside of the car, go over to the front on the driver's side.
Okay, now hang on. The last four digits, 3044.
Okay, where are you?
Is that the number?
Where are you?
No, you gotta tell me if this is the car.
Okay, stop. I can't tell you anything. Where are you?
I'm at Avery Salvage.
A couple things that stand out to me. One is she says the last four digits are. Why does she know that a vehicle, or how does she know that a vehicle can be identified by only the last four digits of the VIN? Do you know
maybe
that,
she's
Laura?
maybe she's into cars.
I don't
mean,
know.
we don't know. She could well be.
Well,
That doesn't make any sense. Why not the first few digits? I mean,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, it's unusual that she would say that she'd volunteer only the last 4 digits and then say, "Tell me if that's the car." It just
Yeah, I think in the context of her being so persistent about telling me if it's the car, because we don't know whether she was into cars or was into vehicles, knew that. I mean, it's another question, isn't it?
except that she said, "No, there are no license plates. Can I go in the car? I can't find." She said, "I can't find the VIN number." He said, "Go around to the front of the car." So I don't know. I don't think she's that familiar with it, and I certainly don't think she should be, in the course of her normal life, that she should be thinking that just the last 4 digits of a VIN number will identify a car.
Right.
It's just troubling to me.
Were you familiar with the Avery salvage property?
No, I'm not I wasn't at all. All I knew it was a 40-acre plot, salvage yard for vehicles.
Now, Ms. Sturm, prior to your arrival at that location, had you had any contact or direction from any law enforcement officials?
No, sir, we didn't.
Why don't you show us then? Where did you and Nicole start looking?
We had searched all of these, then we went down here south, and there were you can see there's 2 rows here. So I searched the first row, and my daughter was on the second row.
Let me stop you right there, Pam. Can you tell the jury what you were looking for?
We were looking for any trace of Teresa, be the car or herself.
Oh, okay. And after looking at those rows of cars, where did you then look?
I continued up here, and I saw these vehicles up here, and this is like a ridge up here. So up on the top, there's a little car path, and you can see there's some vehicles here, and I thought, I have to search up there. I have to search each and every one.
And did you do that?
So I went up there, and I went through 3 cars.
So Jim, you had a reaction when you were watching that.
She's actually got a laser pointer, and she's showing the area where she starts, and it's the top of the yard basically, and there's a group of maybe 5 or 6 cars, and then there's a string of maybe 20 cars, and she said she came down from that 5 or 6 group, searched all those, and went across this, and then noticed cars up on a ridge. Now, in front of her, laid out in front of her, is 3,000 to 4,000 vehicles right there, right next to her, that she's not searching in. She actually strays away from the main lot and goes up and around a pond, a man-made little pond. It looks like maybe a pit of some kind. And then around that up a path, and then at the top of this little ridge is where she actually finds the vehicle. She searched 3 cars, and then I guess the 4th one was the one that she actually found, which was Teresa's RAV4.
Yes, I mean, she's so deliberate in the way that she describes it that it seems to be that she's preempting the questions that would be in most people's minds. And maybe that's just because she's been, prepared well. But just the rationale that she's giving makes little sense to me, for example, where I probably would have carried on that direction of travel that I'm already operating, and moving in and clearing each row as I go, rather than thinking, right, I'm going to go back on myself and go up to the ridge.
Yeah, but what I want to know, what's the most outrageous of this, is that the police officer, when he called and said, change of plans, the search team is there, and yet it's a mother and daughter that are the only ones searching 4,000 cars. Why is that? Where did everybody else go? Did they only ask for 2 people to come on? Or did the detective on the radio say, change of plans, we're going to ask, search team is there, we're going to ask the Averys if the team can come on and search. You would think then that, 15, 20, 30 people would be necessary to search this entire lot. But no, mother and daughter, the only ones there. Everybody else had left, according to her testimony.
Yeah, I think Scott says the majority of people had gone, the searchers, but it's early in the morning. And it is odd. The oddity is that why isn't it the police that are asking, permission or with the search warrant? Why aren't they the ones doing the search? Why is it Pam, daughter, with camera? And just the logic that she explains.
It's not like it's 10 o'clock at night. It's early in the morning when they started, presumably. I mean, they didn't do this in the middle of the night. I mean, they hadn't been searching this lot all day. Why is everybody
So
leaving?
take 20 people, decide which rows you're going to do it in an orderly way so
a
that
grid
you know
search.
that you're clearing row by row. Even that doesn't make, that's what I mean, it doesn't make much sense really in the way that she's describing it.
It's really an anomaly. And certainly, if the police are the ones asking the Averys if this volunteer search crew could do a search, why the hell are they doing it when there's only 2 people to search 4,000 cars? I mean, it's just outrageous.
Well, as Pam said, she would have stayed there, the whole time and searched all of them. But I think it was actually Pam who asked Earl. I think the other brother is looking after the yard whilst the Averys are away, and he gives permission. I think it's him to her saying, yeah, by all means, go, you can search the yard. But yeah, why not take, scores of people, given that you've got, how many acres was it? Ridiculous amount of acres.
40 acres.
40 acres with a huge amount of vehicles on it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. This is another thing that we need to put a check mark in the box of, this is unusual, this is very troubling, and this does not seem like a legitimate way to do a law enforcement search or a search for a vehicle when
Well, it's been
there's
removed
still
from
a
law
miss-
enforcement. That's the
Right.
point, isn't it? They've distanced themselves. They're in the background saying, right, the chief says there's a change of plan, but actually they've distanced themselves from it by asking the volunteers to do that very search that they should be doing themselves. Why?
searching. And it's very difficult to understand. Of course, Pam says,
It's the hand of God.
yes, the
that
hand
leads
of
her
God.
there.
Yes, the hand of God told her where to go. Could have also been Colborn, I guess.
Well, certainly, there could have been some prior information and intelligence that has been received, because it certainly seems to be far too many coincidences here, or certainly things that just don't make sense or add up at the very least.
It kind of makes me wonder, how did that all go down? So Coburn finds the car and then takes, what kind of
Well, it would have been-
machinations go on to end up with Pam? All of that planning, and how are we going to
Yeah, I don't think there has to be that much planning, actually. If Colborn was called by a female to come because they found the car, or if Colborn was in a place looking for the car and he wasn't supposed to be there, then he called in to confirm, right? He telephoned in to confirm, didn't call in on the police radio, and then all he would have to do is basically say, all right, well, we got to find a legitimate way to get this car found so that we could actually use it in evidence. Because if he's illegally on their property and it could only happen if it was an illegal search. In other words, he'd have to be on private property without a search warrant. If it was parked on the side of the road somewhere or abandoned somewhere, then it's absolutely legal for the police or anybody else to see it and search it. So it would have to have been on private property, and obviously the Avery property would have been the only relevant property, because under our law, if I, as a police officer, search John Smith's property and find evidence of a crime of somebody other than John Smith is the only one that I've harmed. I've violated his rights by unreasonable search and seizure. But I haven't violated the person the Averys. If I didn't find it on the Averys lot, and I found it on somebody else's private property that wasn't the Averys, then it can still be used against them. The only place that could cause the car to be excluded in evidence is the Averys property, the defendant's property. He's the only one that has the right to fight the introduction of that evidence because his rights were violated, if his rights were violated.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be a massive conspiracy. I really think sometimes things just unfold and they just happen, and it's the simplest things, that can happen if he is putting extra time and energy into finding evidence that Stephen Avery committed this, i.e. he thinks that he did. And, with Lenk and Colborn, you've got to see the fact that it's in their interests. They would depose, it's in their interest to dedicate some time and energy to it. So he's probably gone out searching, and he comes across, a prime piece of evidence, and he knows that there's nothing that he can do. He can't call it in.
But that's what bothers me. I mean, what if she's in there? I mean, that's the first thing I would think if you found the victim's car. Like, oh my goodness, is she tied up in there? Is her? I mean,
But even then, he can't be associated with it. He can't be associated with why is he out there? There's already a massive conflict of interest. So, on some levels, people don't think as rationally as we are thinking, in the cold light of day, right here and right now. He has a situation, if he does find this car, we're hypothesising that it is in front of him, the way that he calls the plates in.
Right. And here's the thing, though. We get this information through trial testimony. Okay, this is how the information comes in. And unfortunately, I'm going to break it to everybody out there. Trials are not necessarily the entire absolute truth, because there are rules of evidence. Things can come into evidence and things can't come into evidence. And it's also basically a theater, a show, presenting the jury with these facts. In this particular case, the defense is better served by raising the issue and not following through with the follow-up questions that we all have. In other words, what the hell were you doing calling in this car at this time? What he did was he asked the questions. Normally, cops call in, right? Because they're trying to check the vehicle. The vehicle's in front of them, right? Well, I'm going to play this for you. And then when they catch him and he says, well, I didn't say that it was a 94 Toyota. She said it. And they said no, and he replayed it. And that was correct, that Colborn actually said the year and the model of the car, which is an indicator that it was sitting in front of him. But then he drops it, because what he wants to do, the defense attorney, is argue to the jury at the end. You saw Colborn. He doesn't want to give Colborn a chance to actually explain himself. So he cuts it off there. Now, I don't know if the prosecution rehabilitated the witness and went through and Colborn came up with a legitimate reason why he made that call in, because why? They didn't show it in the documentary. They didn't show the redirect of Colborn. So these are gaps that we have. But there's a legitimate reason why the defense attorney did not ask those questions. First of all, you never ask a question that you don't know the answer to already, especially on cross-examination, because otherwise your case can be completely undermined. And secondly, the trial is not the place where every bit of truth comes out, just the truth that actually is admissible as evidence.
And they just have to sow a seed of reasonable doubt. I mean, the defence are not putting the case. They just have to introduce reasonable doubt, i.e., how did Colborn even know about this car? He's calling it in. It seems to be in front of him. This car was clearly put there by law enforcement or another explanation for it. But whatever it is, it looks very dodgy.
Yeah,
and that's what they were introducing.
He just has to punch holes in the prosecution case. It's the prosecution's burden, 100%, to prove the case. So these are this we can put on the list, a check mark next to it as something that's very troubling, something that needs to be answered, and something that the only thing that will actually answer it is if we can actually cross-examine Colborn about that under oath years ago.
And it would be certainly interesting just to have that piece of audio cleaned up as well, just, the whole thing, and seeing whether they can do any match across, even though it's a small sample, to Pam's voice. I think that would be an interesting thing to do. And if there's any connection, I would be interested to know, given the small Townsville, of Colborn to Pam Stern.
Yeah, so what this would mean would be that, if we're talking in terms of conspiracy, it would mean that Pam would have been that woman who said the car's here. Otherwise, there's another woman out there who knew the car was there. And then Colborn, and then somehow the chief would have had to have ordered, the chief of the next county would have had to have ordered Manitowoc to come back and do another search.
Although he said it was the chief, but we don't know even if the chief was in that conversation.
You're absolutely right.
Because that could have been his deception. It could have actually come from him rather than the chief, that they're rerouting.
So Colborn could have talked to the detective from the neighboring county, and then he called.
It would have just been a bit of a chat between them of how they were going to set it up, just keeping it simple.
Got it. Yeah. It's a lot of what ifs, but what I'm left with is a very disturbed feeling that there's a connection between that change of plans and Colborn calling in that plate. It's just not something that a cop does unless he sees the plate in front of him or if he's confirming something that's on a piece of paper in front of him. Neither of which he testified to on the stand that day.
And regardless, it doesn't really point to innocence or guilt as far as Stephen Avery goes, but it just, again, reinforces how people watching this documentary just don't trust law enforcement, that there is something really dirty going on.
Well, and the unfortunate thing that you just said was that they don't trust law enforcement as a result of this. But there are individuals inside of law enforcement that are not trustworthy. We've seen cases across the country, around the world. Of course, that happens. But the vast majority of law enforcement are not like that. They will not do that kind of thing. And I believe that even in this case, the vast majority of the law enforcement officers who did their investigation believed the evidence that they were handed, believed the information that they were given by other people like Lenk and Colborn. And therefore, they were just doing their jobs. They did not think that there was any kind of setup or corrupt investigation going on. So I think it's important to note. I know there are people that certainly believe everybody in the government is corrupt, and that the entire government is a massive conspiracy. And there are other people that think that everybody in the government is absolutely innocent. Well, unfortunately, not everybody in the government is absolutely innocent, but the vast majority of them are, in my opinion.
Quick question. So if there was somebody on that police force who did think that there was something bad going on, what do they do?
Well, I mean, if their chief is not a good person, is a corrupt individual, then there's very little that they can do within their force, but they can go to the state police, they can go to the attorney general and make a complaint. There's an inspector general's office that covers law enforcement misconduct. The FBI does investigations of corrupt law enforcement officers. So there are places that corrupt officers can be investigated and dealt with outside of the police departments where they work. So there's an opportunity for them to go outside, but it probably means they'll lose their job.
Yeah, in a very tight-knit community like that, it seems it would be a really hard thing to do.
I'm sure it would be, but that's what you have to do. I mean, it's kind of like when I went down to Guantanamo, I found out that they were torturing the detainees.
You found that out?
Yeah,
I didn't
found
know that.
out. Yeah, I found it out because I went down there to figure out why they weren't getting proper information out of these detainees. Nobody was cooperating. And I found out it was because they were mistreating them outrageously, and all the way to the point of torturing them. And I was there basically on my own from the Behavioral Analysis Unit, and I had to stand up to 5,000 Marines who were involved in this stuff.
God.
It was not, certainly the general knew what he was doing, and I didn't know at the time that the President of the United States has basically signed off on these, quote, inverted commas, enhanced interrogation methods that were actually amounting to torture. So you have to do it. You can't say, well, everybody else is doing the bad thing, so I'm going to go along, because that makes you a criminal, and you should not be in law enforcement if you are.
Yeah. Well, you're Jim Clemente with balls of steel, so you can do that. But, oh, man, that's incredible, Jim. I didn't know that.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion, and I think we're left with some serious doubts as to the police activity and motivations here, and what really went on between that call that Colborn made and the call that Pam Sturm made. But we're going to have to look more deeply at other aspects of the case, and hopefully that will all put this into context.
Right.
The thing is, there are at least two different sides to this, and the person that killed Teresa Holbach could very well be Steve Avery. The police believed that, they had some evidence of that, and they may have tried to bolster their case, or some of the police may have tried to bolster their case. And it's just very strange that they violated their own conflict of interest policy and became part of the investigation, found a bunch of pieces of very vital information and vital evidence, and sort of
helped the case along, as it were.
It may have, but in a very, very strange and questionable way. And
well, we have much more to talk about, actually, on this Steve Avery case that we'll be getting to in other episodes. But for now,
we're signing off.
We're signing off. And before we go, I wanted to ask Jim and Laura if they have anything that they want to recommend for our listeners, anything that they're kind of excited about this week. anything at all. Just tell me what you're on about.
So I would definitely like to give a plug to our London and UK listeners. Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service have been campaigning for a register for serial stalkers and domestic violence offenders, just like we have sex offenders on a register. And the Home Office opened a consultation at the end of last year, which anybody can basically put a response into. So just a plug to go on the Paladin website and to look at the Paladin response to that. We believe that offenders should be on a register and that there should be new orders where they're monitored and tracked and supervised, just like sex offenders. So please have a look at that and complete a response.
That's amazing. Thanks, Laura, for that. Jim?
I just finished reading a book by Dr. John White, who's a colleague and friend of mine who studies serial killers. He's written a book called Serial Killer, a novel, The Archetype Case, and I just finished reading that. I will have to put a warning on this. It is a very graphic and violent killer that he writes about. He bases it on real killers, so it's not gratuitous, but it is graphic. But if that's the kind of thing that you like to read rather than see, then I think you should read this book. It's a great book.
Excellent.
Very well written.
So I want to recommend a series on Netflix that I just fell in love with and binge watched. It's called Happy Valley, and it is about
It's a great British show.
Do you know what I'm talking
I
about?
do. It's Sarah Lancashire.
Okay, Sarah
It's
Lancashire. I was just
fantastic.
going to say, okay, I think her performance might be the best performance by any actress I've ever seen. And that's saying a lot.
But of course she's British, so yes.
Well, nice.
With inverted
Dame
commas.
Helen Mirren and
Inverted
Sarah Lancashire.
Yeah, so that is a wonderful, wonderful show. It's a very brave show with a very strong female protagonist. I can't recommend it highly enough. So check it out and let me know what you thought.
And what's interesting is another show called Happy Valley, which is a documentary. I'm in that documentary. It's about Penn State University and in State College, Pennsylvania. And the documentary is actually entitled Happy Valley. So just in case you pick up that instead of...
You can check us out on iTunes, SoundCloud, Twitter. Please leave us messages on our Facebook page, and we'll check you later.
For advice or support if you're experiencing stalking in the UK, you can contact Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service on 0207 840 8960 or go on the website www.paladinservice.co.uk. If you're experiencing domestic violence, call the National Domestic Violence Helpline free phone 0800 2000 247. In the US, if you're experiencing domestic abuse and need advice, shelter, safety or counselling, call the Genesis 24-hour hotline 214-946-4357 or go on the website www.genesisshelter.org, or you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline on 800 799 7233.
Real Crime Profile is produced and edited by Paul Francis Sullivan, engineered by Jacob Moose Molin. Music is composed and performed by Simba Sumba. Logo art by Rob Cohen. Real Crime Profile is produced and recorded at Empire Studios LA by XG Production.